Thank you for joining us on this It's a Wrap exclusive. We're here to discuss corruption and examine just how it affects me, you, and every other citizen in this country. One Africa TV has gone to great lengths to locally screen the documentary Fishrot, produced by the Icelandic state broadcaster RUV, as it is vital that the citizens of this great republic understand what happened and become aware of corruption. The corruption allegedly perpetrated by some of those whom we have dubbed to be honorable. We are in the privileged position to have with us in studio Icelandic journalist Helgi Johannsson from the Kveikur show on RUV, which first aired the story on television, as well as local socio-political analyst Vitalio Angula and advocate and legal assistance center trustee Esi Schimming Chase to share their views on the impact of the Fishrot saga and corruption on Namibians. Welcome to the special edition. Helgi, having brought the scandal to light, tell us what shocks you the most about the impact of corruption and country citizens?
That's a big question. I think that what has shocked me the most was, of course, the fact that we had one of the biggest companies in Iceland involved in something that we thought, well, was unthinkable. Basically, being a part of, as it appears to be, a big case of state looting in Africa. But you know, and the other thing that I find strange is, of course, you know, we know who's gaining from this corruption, but the people that are losing, the people we have been seeing here. We saw them when we were in September, and we did the day when we went to the townships, and for example in Kadhila and also in Tutaleni in Walvis Bay. You know, that yeah, that's something that, you know, it kind of, I'm kind of puzzled to see that people aren't even more angry when you see what's going on there. It's a shame.
It is indeed. Esi, tell me, what shocked you the most watching that documentary?
Well, I cannot say I was particularly shocked by the documentary per se, because I don't think that this is the only case of corruption in Namibia over the past 30 years. I think what this particular insert did was, you know, to thoroughly investigate something and bring to light something that's been happening over a very long time. So corruption didn't start with Fishrot. There are a lot more fishes around, and there's a lot more corruption around. You know, from my perspective, I think of the apartheid years. I think of my peers, my uncles and aunts, some of whom were tortured so that they could be free, so that they could speak what was on their mind, so that they could have and live a life where they are able to have leaders that did not abuse them. And I wonder, those whose blood watered our freedom are turning in their graves right now, because what did they die for? What did they sacrifice for? Over the past 30 years, our country has been raped, looted and pillaged by certain members of the leadership. And what I think this does is that Namibians are disgusted, they are disillusioned, they are disheartened, they are desperate in a floundering economy. And so now they're coming up. Don't think that they're not angry, but I don't think that at this stage, considering that the elections are very close, that we should be preaching anger per se. We want peaceful elections. We are a peaceful country. Then whatever leadership comes into being has to take a stand against corruption, and those who have been involved must be tried, and if found guilty, they must be prosecuted to the fullest extent.
Yeah, please don't get me wrong. I'm not, you know, I'm not predicting or hoping for a riot. I was talking about, when I was talking about the angry, I was talking about the people generally in my home country who have been talking about this as some kind of a everyday event in Africa, and referring to it as, you know, as we like to call it in Iceland, the short skirt theory, which was generally used to against women who came and reported rape and sexual assault back in the day, and got back from the police that maybe their skirt was a little bit too short, and that's basically what we've been hearing in Iceland, even from ministers. So the anger I was talking about was definitely in my own country.
Understood.
And Vitalio, what do you take away from this whole saga?
Okay, what shocks me the most is the legal provisions that actually allowed for such an arrangement to take place. What angers and shocks me is the opportunity cost of the corruption. When I was reading the story and when I was familiarizing myself with the story, I understood that the fishing quota that was given to the Icelandic company could have been given to the Namibian company. And I know from experience and also from reading papers that a lot of Namibian companies actually had to shut down because they could not get access to fishing quotas. So people actually lost their jobs. So I was talking to a friend in Walfish Bay and said, Vita, the number of people who actually lost their jobs because their companies couldn't get a fishing quota, there are a lot of people, and some people even committed suicide. And I didn't verify that. But the opportunity cost of corruption, we already have a problem that we're exporting jobs. But we could have kept these factories running. We could have kept people employed in these factories if those fishing quotas were for the benefit of the Namibian population. Because in our constitution it is enshrined that the resources of this country are for the benefit of the citizens of this country. Now our resources were used for the benefit of the Icelanders and their business partners. So we lost. So just the opportunity cost of what we lost out is what really infuriated me. And these are people, ministers are political appointees. They are elected by the people. So the people are electing people who they cannot trust, and they are electing people who are willing to sell them out. It's a lot of money, but even the background of some of the ministers, some of them were actually labor activists in their heyday. That's how they got into politics. Now you are coming from a labor background where you've been fighting for workers' rights, and you come to a political position, and now you are willing to sell out. It questions, for me, it brings about the question of us as people. We are truly corruptible, but at the same time, I think even people who engage in corruption, they have a degree of ethics and morality. But these people, they have none. They just went in and they went all out.
Please grab your popcorns, my audience. I'm sure this is going to be very, very juicy. Welcome back to this It's a Wrap exclusive discussion on corruption and the Fishrot scandal featuring Namibian and Icelandic company Samherji, which recently made international headlines for all the wrong reasons and revealed the high level and yet blatant corruption of certain Namibian members of parliament, having formed their parties on socialist and communist principles, and their cronies who, whilst having ridden on what we have fought for in terms of liberation, are now defeating the ends of justice in their quest to line their own pockets. Helgi, so what consequences have there been for your countrymen in your country related to this case?
Well, to the general public there have been none, but to the company, the CEO of Samherji, one of the big owners and founder of the company, he stepped down. An uncle of his took charge of the company, and yeah, they're of course under criminal investigation now, and the taxes are also being investigated. But these investigations are just didn't even start until well, the day we aired the show, so that they just recently started. But the government has of course also taken a lot of heat because of this, but mainly because of the connection that the acting fisheries minister in Iceland has to the company. He's actually he was the chairman of the board of Samherji 20 years ago, and has close friendship with the former CEO. So of course that has been up for debate, to say the least, but the government actually put out, I think, like 12 or 13 points that they were going to changes that they were going to make in legislation and such regarding the Icelandic angle of it, like the fishing quotas of Iceland, how much one company can hold, and something like that. So yeah, it has had an effect up to extent, but we're still, well, we have to see what comes out of the criminal investigation, because there is of course a law in Iceland, as it is in many other countries, that makes it illegal for Icelandic people to pay bribes to government officials in foreign countries. So that could also, you know, although I think it's highly unlikely that the Samhei guys are going to be dragged to court here in Namibia. At least I wouldn't think they would show up probably, but they could, you know, could face consequences in Iceland for that part of it.
Esi, in Namibia we saw the whole law swoop down on the Amushelelos with their forex case, and yet in this case we're not seeing much in terms of, you know, will from the legal fraternity. What are we to make of that?
Well, the legal fraternity for the first time participated in standing up and also marching against corruption. If we're talking about whether any legal steps have been taken against the people who are alleged to be perpetrators, to be honest, I don't know yet. But I do hope that ethical leadership becomes the norm when one considers what has happened. I think the real test is going to be what happens when the leadership takes its role after the elections. I think the true test is going to happen when people say, when we actually start investigating what's going to happen after the elections. We're so close to the elections now. It's a couple of days. I don't think we can even start to deal with the tip of what's been happening in our country over the past 30 years in the next couple of days preceding the election. What we have to look at is whatever leadership takes leadership after the election, that they have an ethical leadership, that they promote good governance, not just say that we are into good governance, but actually take steps so that people can believe again in their leadership. I think whoever takes over has to consider Namibians and stop appointing people who are political cadres that are only interested in eating and in themselves, as opposed to being interested in the people of Namibia. And I think once people who are appointed are interested in the people of Namibia and actively maintain the welfare of the people as they are constitutionally mandated to, then we can start investigating all those people that have committed these offenses and bring them to book.
What chances do you think there are of that occurring?
I was listening to Esi's response, and I think it's quite idealistic in nature, but she overlooks the fact that the Anti-Corruption Commission, which is tasked with investigating this case, the appointing or the Director General, the highest ranking official of the Anti-Corruption Commission, is actually appointed by the President. I speak under correction. After I think from advice from the Judicial Commission, the President appoints. So how do you investigate your appointing authority? So these are some of the questionable forms of governance that we have. When this story broke, I was taken back to pictures we saw in the Brazil World Cup. Brazil, they hosted the World Cup, I think 2014 or 2010. 2010 it was in South Africa. 2014 it was in Brazil, where we had pictures of the president with a glass of wine. I think Eso was there, and I think the other guys were there. The whole fishing syndicate, or who we suspect to be the fishing syndicate. So obviously it already brings about questions of ethics, like these guys are already hanging out with the head of state, and the head of state is the appointing authority of the Director General of the Anti-Corruption Commission.
Was he head of state at the time that these pictures were taken?
I don't. Was he or was he?
No, not
that's
yet.
the question that you need to answer.
Okay.
Because he was not head of state.
Okay, he was not
and
head
I'm
of.
not promoting or saying anything, but just get your facts right about what happened and who was there.
Okay, he was not head of state at that time, but they already had a close relationship. But I think also it was already at a point in time where he was regarded as the
incumbent.
as a president coming in. So already that relationship is already close knit, and now we have to ask ourselves, what in terms of conflict of interest, how do we separate, and how must a president behave himself not to be seen to be too close to people who engage in corruption? Because those photos, they tell us a picture that the president actually knows what is going on. He is complicit in the actions of these individuals. So one thing I've always asked my peers in the media field is, why are we persecuting these two people? Because they are two people in a greater scheme of things, and it comes down to the choice of governance we choose. I just believe that a president should not be associated too much with business people in order for him to be regarded as credible and somebody who can actually take an active stand against corruption. Because what we've seen is our president taking a passive stand against corruption, because he's saying, oh, I can't fire them because they had already resigned. I mean, how do we take our president serious in the fight against corruption if he thanks people for their patriotism when they have engaged? How patriotic is it to sell the resources of your state at the expense of workers who work in factories? How patriotic is that? So all these questions, I think, like listening to this case, every day another question comes up. I've got more questions than answers.
So some Namibians look at Fishrot and think, oh, it's just a movie about somewhere in some place. Do you think that we are fully cognizant of just how we as citizens are going to have to, cough up in some way in the future to cover these discrepancies and monies that just go missing, whether it's through our taxes or in any other way? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, we're doing that right now. I mean, the state is entitled to collect tax so that it can manage the country economically. Now, I pay tax, and it's important for me to know that those to whom I pay tax are going to utilize that money to benefit every Namibian citizen, and not just a chosen few. It's a big issue for me as a taxpayer, especially when you consider now the economy is floundering. And for example, recently there was this attempt there's this attempt to take away our right to allow our children to inherit, by way of example. I now have to be forced, if I have a minor that's inherits, to be putting money into the guardian's fund that is managed by a state operative. For me, that's a problem. I ask myself, if the money that I'm paying tax for is not going to be utilized for the benefit of the Namibian people, why should I pay tax?
Your thoughts, Vitalio?
I just disagree. You're saying that Namibians might not be cognizant, or they don't know the degree of what corruption can do to the nation, if I understood you correct.
Yes.
It's not that they are not cognizant, but I think that people, they feel powerless. Because here you are, you've trusted this government for so many years, and here a case like Fishrot breaks. I mean, there are people who have raised doubts and questions regarding conflict of interest in Namibia, and what entails conflict of interest. What put these ministers in a position to practice conflict of interest is because the minister held so much power. But the Constitution of Namibia provides for the separation of the legislative, the judiciary, and the executive. Now we have ministers who are executive, and they are now in the legislature. Now we have a minister of fisheries who is going to table a bill in parliament, and he tells the people in parliament that vote in support. And because we have a 2/3 majority of the ruling party, he can caucus beforehand so that that law, which benefits him and his friends and the rest of parliamentarians, goes through parliament. So this is actually legalized theft. At the end of the day, the citizens, they are watching this happen and they're like powerless. They're like, okay, how am I going to allow? There's a conflict of interest, yes. And the member of executive should not be in the legislature, yes. But as a citizen, what can I do about it? So it's that powerlessness, I think, that people just sit back and say, okay, anyway, maybe if I keep quiet one day, maybe, and I say viva viva, I can also become a minister, then I can eat the same. So it becomes, how do I get into the system to crook and benefit? It's not about how do I fight the system, because to start the fight, you already feel disempowered. So who wants to take that fight? It's actually an easier fight to be on the side of the criminals.
Wow. Helgi, what do you have any thoughts on that? Do you want to share?
No, but well, from you know my little knowledge about Namibian politics and maybe the thing that I know most about this case is that this case shows more than else that the lack of transparency is, of course, the best way for corrupt politicians and corrupt people in general to do what they want to do. It's one of the key things and that we found out in this case is that, for example, the Ministry of Fisheries is generally considered to be the least transparent institution in Namibia. They even got this award for it, called the Golden Padlock or something 2 or 3 years ago. But just the fact that the minister has the power to allocate natural resources as he does, without having any checks and balances, without even telling people who is getting the quota, who is fishing the quota, and stuff. That alone, is basically, you're basically playing up for corruption by doing that. So I think just to start with, I think that should be the thing that people should learn from this. And if the president means what he says about tackling corruption, that should be the thing that he should be running on, just like all the other candidates. That transparency is and will be the best way to tackle corruption, especially when you're in a country like Namibia, where you have like a, I don't know if you like the term, but it's like a one-party state. You have a political party that is became a political party after fighting for your independence, and people have, of course, have a special relations with the party that is basically, the one that got them the independence,
the
so
liberator.
to speak. Yeah, the liberator. So, so even more so, you would need more transparency and more checks and balances.
Would you say that in Europe there's a tendency or a culture of, taking Africans for fools, and that we are easily corruptible and malleable?
Yeah,
Tell me about that.
I think if something that if anything that we learned from the general discussion in Iceland, even among high-ranking politicians, is that basically you are, as I told before, are all wearing too short of skirts. So that's the problem. The problem is, and it has even been put out like, the problem isn't the Icelandic company. The problem is corrupt socialist politicians in Africa.
Well, for as long as we know, the resources of the continent of Africa have been taken by the European and the American, and I can't find.
Has anybody else made wealth on the resources of the Africans except for the Europeans or the Americans? So yeah,
this is where we go back to ethical leadership. Mm-hmm. We are looking at a situation where you had 30 years of an apartheid regime, and then there's a new leadership, and now it's my turn to eat. That's the mentality that we're faced with. It's my turn to eat now. Mm-hmm. And it's all about me. What about the compassion? What about just dealing with the Namibian people? The Namibian people who were poor before independence and who are even poorer after independence. There are a small group of Namibian people that have become extraordinarily wealthy. They are corruptible, but not everyone is corruptible. We cannot say everyone in our leadership is corruptible.
And I can also tell
Exactly.
you that, it might be a surprise to you, but actually a couple of years ago an Icelandic congressman was had to serve time in jail for being corrupt, for using state funds, and he was even charged with bribery. We just had a news story today in Iceland about a huge bribery case that's coming up involving an Icelandic state-owned company. So, we might be overlooking a lot of things in our own backyard when we tend to put the blame on the Africans.
Vitalio, I see you are scribbling very, very viciously here. What do you want to tell me? What do you want to say?
No, I just had a problem with the way you phrased your question when you said the Europeans thinking that Africans are so corruptible, because I think Europeans are just as corrupt as Africans, if not even worse. Because with the illegal fishing, with the whole quota regime, I know Norway as a country has been at the forefront of fighting against the illegal fishing which is taking place off the waters of Western Sahara. The same way that the Namibian government, when it first took over, it had to fight a war against illegal fishing in Namibian waters. But who are these people who were engaging in the illegal fishing off Namibia's coast? It is Spanish trawlers. These are European entities. Who are the people till today fishing illegally, even though the European Court of Justice ruled that no more fishing must take place off the coast of Western Sahara? Who are the people who are fishing there? It is the Spanish. It is them who behave corruptly. Spain is not in Africa. Spain is in Europe. So that question where you asked that are the Europeans taking Africans for fools? No, I think Europeans, by their very nature, they are just corrupt. Their whole history is just corrupt. And we should stop idealizing or holding them at a greater standard as Africans, because I think when it comes to tests of ethics and moralities, our African governments are much cleaner than their European counterparts.
I think we should stop generalizing people after, skin color, the places that they were, I was going to say made, but where
they come from, where they're born.
Yeah. So, we can, of course, if we want to do some checks and balances between how corrupt Europe is and how corrupt Africa is, I'm not sure about it, but it's definitely us and the Europeans, if you want to talk to us all as a whole, talk about us all as a whole, that are more corrupt. Historically speaking, I think we're miles ahead. But the thing is that there has to be some kind of a global change, both from the European countries and from the African countries, because we live in a world where trawlers can be moved from Iceland down to Namibia. They can fish, they can overfish, they can maybe bribe, they can break all kinds of law, and then they can maybe sail them back and start using them in another African country or another African country. And for example, the use of tax havens. Why on earth hasn't Namibia just ripped apart this tax treaty it has with Mauritius? There's no. Why should Namibia have a special tax treaty, double tax treaty with Mauritius? There's no reason for it, except for companies like the one we were talking about, Samiri, and other companies from Hong Kong and others, to shift profits out of the country into Mauritius, into dummy companies that none of the Samiri employees have even been to Mauritius, but they are basically building their companies here in Namibia for the access of staff, you know, management team and whatever, which is supposed to be in Mauritius. There's nobody in Mauritius, you know. And why, you know, it shouldn't be such a hard, you know, I've seen this guy who's a finance minister of yours. I think he can rip apart this tax treaty because it's useless.
I think what we need to look at, and there I agree with you, we need to look at globally, but more importantly for Africa and for Namibia, we need to look at ethical leadership. We need to look at governance. We need to develop a zero tolerance for corruption. That's all I want from my leadership. Take care of the people of this country. That is what the
Do you think the reaction from the president now is giving you that?
Which reaction? The president has had many reactions.
Yeah, yeah. I'm talking about the press release that came from the president's office today, where it was talking about all of this, all of the stories made out of the Fishrot files were some kind of a some kind of a conspiracy to
discredit before elections, especially.
Yeah, something like that. So that doesn't sound like a leader who's gonna, you know, live and learn.
Yeah, it's.
But don't get me wrong, we have guys like that in Iceland too.
That's
even
what I was
women
going to
like
say.
that. Yeah.
I was going to say that you've
so
got leaders in Iceland.
You don't have to. I'm not criticizing you as being worse than us. You can. You please don't. You know, get me wrong. But that's what, you know. Yeah, it makes me almost sad to see how it is, both on our part and on your part, how the reaction from the political leadership is.
The nice thing about this is that the Namibian people are now aware, and they are more in tune, and they are more informed about what's going on. The only way for change to happen in this country is for the people of this country to bring change. You know, because this is an election, I'm loath to speak about political parties or politics. I am a legal practitioner. I have sworn to uphold the Constitution. But the one thing that's very important, I think, for Namibia is that we need to have a strong opposition. We need to have a developing opposition, because the opposition will keep those who are in power accountable. I cannot advocate for any specific person. I don't think that's my role here today, but the people of Namibia need to speak. The only way things can change is for the people of Namibia. It was the people of Namibia that fought against apartheid. It is the people of Namibia that, through the exercise of their voters' rights, are going to choose whatever leadership there is. The people of Namibia, from my perspective, are the most important people here. We have hundreds of thousands of people that do not have access to food. That we have 10, 15 people that have access to hundreds of millions. That, for me, is unacceptable. Not naming names or pointing fingers, I'm just talking basic principles. So one thing that all of this has done, it's brought Namibian people together, and we have become unified again in the fight against corruption as Namibian people, not as tribes, not as colors, not as races, not as sexes, but as Namibian people. And for me, that's a good thing. It's a good thing for people to get up, stand up against corruption, and move forward. As I said, we cannot fix this 30-year rot in a number of days. We've got to see what happens after the elections. We've got to see if that people put their money where their mouth is.
Vitalio, you were saying earlier that the opposition parties also benefit from, for example, fishing quotas. What are your thoughts on that?
As he speaks about governance and ethical leadership, for me it just brought the question of, should members of parliament be allowed to do business with the state? We have this law that says that no, when you're in parliament you have to declare what are your assets, but is declaring really enough?
No.
Okay, I declare now my assets. Okay, so what? Now I'm sitting in parliament, the minister tables a bill. I can directly benefit from that bill. Am I not going to pass that bill? And yes, members of opposition parties do also have access to fishing quotas. They have been given fishing quotas. So they are as much complicit in the rot and the corruption as the ruling party. So when it comes to ethical governance, it requires, if you want to do business, do business. If you want to be a lawmaker, do governance, but don't do both. And the Constitution, I think it expressly states, but she's a constitutional expert, I don't know, I speak under correction, that members of parliament should not directly benefit from the country's resources in their positions as members of parliament. So that is the ethical relationship we want to have with our parliamentarians. Just choose, there's enough space for everybody in Namibia. And having business people in parliament, the example of Donald Trump, I'm not a big fan of Donald Trump, but when he became president of the United States, he couldn't do business anymore. He had to give it over to the sons and stuff for them to run. He can't engage in business because people want this separation of powers. Because if you are in it together, that's what brings about the
business. Who are they doing business for when the sons do business? Who is helping the sons get the business?
That's Saki Sangala's defense, that he put all of his wealth into the trust of his friend James Hatuikulipi. You know, that's basically his defense.
Yeah,
it didn't go well for him, and it didn't go well for Trump either.
Yeah, it's very complex. These governance things, they are very, very, we cannot put them in autonomous compartments. But what I'm saying, that a person who is in parliament cannot benefit from a legislation that is in parliament. They cannot benefit from resources of the state based on legislation which they are debating and passing in parliament. That is unethical, and currently
it's unlawful also. You know, because actually one of the things that I did, I read this constitution of yours, and I read the anti-corruption laws, and I read even the white paper that was done on the Namibianization of the fishing industry, and so. And I see that a lot of the laws that are in place here in Namibia and have been in place since the independence they were like light years ahead of what we had in Iceland. For example, the anti-corruption law and you know, so that's the rules and regulation are basically all in place here. Yes. You even have the institution and stuff, but again, with a lack of transparency and
an opportunistic interpretation of some of those provisions, as it were.
And you know, and this big political party that has all of this power and has had for a long time, you know, then laws and rules and regulations, you know, they just tend to be not enough.
Yeah. So it seems that we could debate this matter for a very long time, but unfortunately we are running out of time. I'd like to have your closing comments, please. Let's start with you, Vitalio.
No, I'm very grateful actually for the opportunity. I think when I came here, I learned so much from my fellow panelist, Esi. I learned so much from you. Helga, I also learned so much from you. I think it opened my eyes to the realities that we have in this country. And one thing I think that we overlooked is the citizens' mandate to hold the government accountable and how to hold those in power accountable. Because I think if we could have screamed as loud as we are screaming now before this happened, it would have never happened. It's because we have become somewhat passive citizens and we are waiting for somebody to break the news for us, in this case Helga, and then we are all like, oh, this Fishrot. But the constitution, it's there, the anti-corruption act, it's there. We must familiarize ourselves and we must always raise objections. We must ask, can the minister really table a bill that gives him so much powers? And we must already start demonstrating at that time to make sure that this thing doesn't go through. So one thing that I'm taking away is that there is a need for us as citizens to become actively engaged when our lawmakers are passing laws that benefit them but don't benefit us and the workers in Walfish Bay who lost their jobs as a result of Fishrot.
Great. Esi?
I think we're in a very, very ambiguous position right now, in the sense that we are in a country that has major economic problems, that has major rot in some areas of its leadership. I would like to encourage the Namibian people to remain peaceful, to speak up for their rights, like they always have, in a peaceful manner. I would like to ask the leaders of this country, the state that owns everything that is in and on and under and around the land, to actively promote and maintain the welfare of the Namibian people, please. Not some, but all of us.
Thank you all. Thank you all very much for your time. I wish you all a very pleasant evening. And with that, it's a wrap.
Thank you.